Hello everyone, my name is Rachel Boudreau and this presentation will be about teen dating violence. I recognize that this is the third presentation about TDV, so I have reviewed the other ones and I hope that this one, while there will definitely be some overlapping information, I also hope to have included some other items that are not overlapping from the other ones. So, what is teen dating violence? And I combined a couple of definitions, one from a website called Love is Respect, which has a wealth of information, and then Love and Respect, which was a teen dating guide created by teens for teens in New Mexico. So, teen dating violence is a pattern of abuse, of behaviors, attitudes, and actions that one person uses to gain and maintain power and control over their partner, and then that partner feels powerless, controlled, and scared. And so the rates of TDV are about 1 in 3, and that is a statistic that is found in most, and actually in all of the research that I was doing. So that's a pretty consistent statistic. Young girls, 16 to 24, experience the highest rates of teen dating violence. And what I also thought was interesting in doing all of this research, this was something I was totally unfamiliar with, and I found that there's actually quite a bit out there, but this didn't emerge until the 1980s, and then the statistics didn't really start coming out until about the early 2000s or so. So why is this an issue? Well, first off, if we think of kind of a macro level, there are some countries and cultures which normalize violence against women, and that can be passed down generation through generation. Additionally, teen dating violence intersects all sorts of populations, and that is perhaps one of the biggest issues is this intersection here. So it is not limited to any one population in specific. Teen dating violence can also lead to substance abuse, depression or anxiety disorders, feeding or eating disorders, unintended pregnancies, or sexually transmitted diseases and infections. And at worst, teen dating violence can lead to fatalities, whether it's a partner killing another partner or whether it's a partner taking their own life. So there are several different types of abuse when it comes to teen dating violence. There's physical abuse, emotional and verbal, sexual abuse. Those are probably the big three that most people are familiar with. And then digging and doing some more research, most of this is from Love and Respect and Love is Respect. There's also financial abuse, digital abuse, and stalking. While I didn't put in an extra slide about the digital abuse and the use of social media, that is another big area within teen dating violence and how to have safe communication online and how to take care of your own social media sites and passwords and all of that. So that's really another big area of interest in research within teen dating violence. So who abuses? And the reality is, well, that most often our focus can be on guys, and oftentimes that is the bigger population that does abuse. Girls also abuse as well, but the types of abuse are different between guys and girls. So girls are more likely to slap, kick, and pinch and be emotionally abusive and threaten to take their own lives, whereas guys are more likely to be physically and sexually abusive, and as a result, they're more likely to cause injuries with their abuse. So why do people abuse? And I think this is a good question to be asking at times throughout this. We often think, why do people stay in those relationships? And there is a slide on that, but perhaps we should also be asking, why do people abuse? Some people believe that teen dating violence is acceptable. There's more often than not a history of previous trauma or previous abuse. Depression or anxiety can oftentimes lead people to be abusive. Substance abuse is a big contributing factor. Witnessing parental violence as well. And also reading, what I thought was very interesting is that abuse is a learned behavior. And so someone needs to learn how to do it and what it is. And so just keeping that in mind, I think can be helpful. And someone had to learn to do this. And where did they learn to do that? So here's the power and control wheel for the teen version, and you can see all sorts of different factors on here. There's peer pressure, using social status, intimidation, threats, isolation, and you can go back and look at this. I'll post the slides for you to look at as well. Now, another power and control wheel that I found was on equality. So instead, what's the opposite of being in power and control and using that? It would be, what would being equal be? And so this was sort of the antidote to that. And I think that it's really interesting. So using non-threatening behavior, using respect, being honest and accountable, sharing power, communication. I think these are some awesome skills that teens could develop. I think, well, all adults could develop in our personal relationships that we have with people. I also did a little bit of looking up on the LGBTQ community, and this community still faces teen dating violence, but they do so in other ways. And some of the reading that I was doing is that for people who are in a relationship with one another, and it's an abusive relationship, an abusive teen dating violent relationship, is that when it comes to disclosing the abuse, that sometimes they're either ousting themselves, so people may not know that they are homosexual or they may be transgender or they're even in that relationship, or they may be ousting their partner. And so it gets very complicated and many layers here, because then you're not just revealing abuse, but then you're revealing something that someone has been keeping or has been holding on to for whatever reason. And it's not necessarily the other person's responsibility to oust that other person in that in their orientation or their relationship decisions. So also I found one article that said that teens of this community have higher rates of teen dating abuse or teen dating violence, and they are at higher risk for all types of teen dating violence. And at the highest risk are the transgender youth and females. And so I put in here, this was the study done in about 2014, over 5,600 youth in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, and it was a self-report survey. And you can see in here the rates that LGBT youth and experience violence compared to heterosexual youth. And you can see that these rates are much higher than the heterosexual youth. And this just really blew my mind at how high the rates were in almost all of those categories. So this is certainly something that needs further research and further intervention. Also, there's a power and control wheel for the LGBTQ community, and I believe this one is addressed more specifically for adults. However, I think there's still pertinent information on here. There were some interesting things on here, like questioning if you're a real lesbian or a real man or a real woman, and so on and so forth. So I thought that a wheel had been developed for this community showed that the attention is coming to the surface. So I also, kind of thinking through the developmental theory perspective or the lifespan perspective, I think this is an important aspect when working with teenagers. You could also view this from the feminist perspective, and I didn't get into that as much, but I think considering the different developmental aspects that are happening for teenagers. So biologically, we know there are many hormonal changes that are going on with teenagers at this stage in life. The onset of puberty, experimenting with sex or other substances. Then we have some psychological changes like mood swings, and then even thinking about the Piaget and Erikson and Kohlberg and where teens are at this stage of life. And so if we kind of think of teens like 12-ish to about 19 or 20, obviously in that range of 8 years, there's going to be different developments for each age group. You've got early adolescence, middle adolescence, and late adolescence. So this isn't, these are some very broad statements for that time period. And some social changes here. So valuing peers' opinions over their parents' opinions, more independence, maybe babysitting or other jobs, or being able to use public transportation, and really developing some romantic and intimate relationships. And also within the past few years, this idea of fluid sexuality has come on board. And so that maybe that a person isn't necessarily totally female or male, or they're only going to date girls or only going to date guys, that it's kind of fluid back and forth. And so this was something, even when I was growing up, that was not a concept yet. And so this is certainly a newer cultural idea, I think, that we need to consider. And I put it under the social, thinking of it as more of a social construct, but if anybody has any feedback about that, or maybe I'm totally wrong here, please go ahead and make those remarks. Also, during the teenage years, the brain is still developing, and while most of the focus for brain development has been on from birth to 5 and birth to 3, there's actually a small amount of brain development in the teenage years. So the brain overproduces this gray matter, which is essentially the plasticity, and that is shaped by a person's connections and experiences. You've got these synapses and these neurons, and they're making all of these connections. And the second time that this happens is around 11 or 12 years of age. And then the brain goes through the pruning process. For any of those synapses and neurons that aren't being used, the brain trims away. And so while teenagers have high problem-solving skills during this age, they don't quite understand the total future implications or consequences of their decisions. They still have lack of impulse control and self-regulation. And oftentimes they may have those problem-solving skills when they're calm, but in those emotional moments, and there are a lot of them, they have much more trouble solving problems. And also just keeping in mind that the brain fully develops roughly around the age of 25. So just keeping these things in mind, using this developmental perspective as teenagers are in relationships where there is teen dating violence, thinking they may not quite understand the implications or the consequences of the partner that they're with or the decisions that they're making. And because they're highly emotional, they might be making more impulsive decisions and not able to self-regulate as well as they would if they were 25 or 30. So keeping that in mind, so why do people stay? And I think maybe not recognizing that it is an abusive relationship. I dated this guy in high school, and he was the pastor's son, dated him for quite some time. And reflecting back, I think, wow, there were some unhealthy dynamics within that relationship. And I could see how people might think like, oh, it's just normal, it's just the way that they are. But when you're a teenager, there's so much going on in your brain and with those relationships that it could be easy to not even recognize that it is an abusive relationship. There could be pressure from other sources or peers or communities to stay within that relationship. And the reality is not everything is bad about that relationship. Teens may feel reluctant, ashamed, or embarrassed to talk to anybody, or not even knowing where to turn. And if teens have had a previous history of abuse, they may just think that's the way that relationships go. They might feel they're responsible for that person's emotions, and I think especially if they come from an emotionally abusive background. So what does prevention look like? And I think that there are a lot of different things that can be done. So teaching what healthy relationship is, what to look for in a partner, what is healthy communication, and I also think empowering the victim. So how can we empower the victim and not just shame that victim? There are several teen dating violence intervention programs out there. One of them is Safe Dates, which is an evidence-based program I found on the SAMHSA website. And the Center for Disease Controls recommends using the program Dating Matters. And there's definitely some overlap. I read some articles, I didn't put them in here, but there seems to be a little bit of controversy as to how effective intervention and prevention programs are. So I think if we keep in mind that the risk and protective factors, there could be a myriad of risk and protective factors, and really what needs to be done is to meet the needs of each individual and each individual population. So a middle school here in Alaska might look very different than a middle school in New York City or even a high school, and so one program may not work for the other school, and so being able to meet the needs of each population you're working with. This was another awesome resource, and I will just scroll through the slides because I'm running out of time here, but this is a teen dating safety card that you can download online for free and use if you're working with teens. Some final thoughts here is in the TED Talk by Jackson Katz. He talks about domestic violence is not just a woman's issue or a teen's issue, but it's an issue for everybody, and how easy it is to leave men out of the picture, and they also need to be held responsible. And I think, keeping in mind violence begets violence, and how do we break that cycle?